There's a great deal of talk about the impending arrival of self-driving automobiles, self-driving trucks, self-driving vehicles in general. And there's lots, by the way, for those of you that follow the technology, this is coming, but it's not going to be next week, and it's not going to be next month, and it's not going to be this year. It takes time, and there are a lot of things to solve. But it's coming. And some initial experiments are already underway. I assume some of you know that. And estimates have been made that say, for example, here in the United States, 4 million people will lose their jobs. You may be interested to know little statistics. That's what a lot of us in economics do. And if you're not good at it, that's all you do. You just look up numbers and you write them down and you send emails to other people who are doing the same thing, and they send you emails, and then you go to sleep. In 29 U.S. states, truck driving is the most popular profession. That is, more people are driving trucks than any other line of work. 29 states. That's more than half of the United States. Truck driving is the number one in terms of the number of people whose livelihood depends on that. So you're talking about a spectacular loss of jobs. So I picked up a story, how they're dealing with this in Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden. And I was struck by the simple way they explained their strategy, so I thought I would present it to you. They were asked, what are you going to do about it? And the answer there of the Swedish Minister for Employment and Integration, named Johansson. Most people in Sweden are named Johansson. I won't help you a lot. But his first name, or her, Y-L-V-A. I don't know how to say that. I don't know which gender that is either. Not that it matters. We don't protect jobs in Sweden, this minister said. We protect workers. Think about that. In the United States, we think, most of us, that to protect the job and to protect the worker are the same thing. But they aren't. And they never were. What do I mean? Here in the United States, in capitalism, if you lose your job, your employer says, you know, have a very nice day someplace else. Go. I have no responsibility for you. I have no obligation to do anything. I paid you, you came, you did whatever it is we were having you do. I don't need you anymore. Have a very nice day someplace else. Sweden doesn't think like that. They feel they have an obligation. They want to protect the worker, which means they want to protect the worker from unemployment. But they don't care about protecting the job. So, for example, if technology makes a job redundant, because we have the technology to drive the car without a driver, we can do it another way, well then, good, we don't need that work done. But that has got nothing to do with the obligation to the man or the woman who made a livelihood driving the car. That we have an obligation to, because that's a fellow citizen, that's a human being, that's a family, that's a community. So we will take care of that. Wow. A society committed to protecting the worker, not the job. Imagine if American workers kind of got that. Would they spend a lot of time insisting that the number of people on a team that runs a locomotive has to be 32, even though everybody knows it takes about 3? Well, we know why railroad unions do that, because they're trying to protect the job of those 32 people, and the only way you can do it in this society is to keep that job going. You have to protect the job to protect the job holder. Sweden doesn't have this problem. Of course, we will protect the job holder, but we don't have to keep a job going that makes no sense. A job that technology has rendered redundant, or a job that people don't want done anymore because they don't want to buy that stuff anymore. They've lost interest in that. So we don't need the jobs that 10,000 people did making X because the society doesn't want X anymore. Now, what do you do with those people who don't have a job anymore because that job isn't needed or wanted or is technologically obsolete? Well, here's two things a society could do, which in Sweden they discuss. These strange people from the cold north. Although here in New York nowadays, cold everywhere. Here's what they do. Number one, by the way, folks, if you're thinking of asking a question that I can respond to in the second half, take one of these cards, write it down. So here's the two things you can do. Just think about it. How do you protect a worker without protecting his or her job? Let's take the example of the vehicles. We need X million fewer drivers. Okay, let's arrange for them to do something else that the community wants. Let's make a list of the things the community needs. To rebuild our cities, to provide daycare, to have a program for the elderly, to green the American society, to make our houses be better insulated, and to make... You and I, we could take these pieces of paper, instead of writing questions, write down a list of useful things that would make life in this society better. That's what those people will be asked to do. They will be paid a salary because we're going to protect them and their income and their job, but it won't be the job that we don't need anymore because that would be irrational. And we wouldn't want to be irrational, otherwise we'd have a large number of people making horse carriages. We don't need horse carriages anymore, so we don't have people doing that. And of course the other thing that technology does, which we've talked about, is say, well, we can do with half of our workers the same amount of output it used to take twice as many because we have a new machine. What do we do in that? Well, we know what capitalists do. We know what they do. You all know it, even if you can't say it, so I'm going to say it. The capitalist says, wow, I can get the same number of phones or whatever we're talking about with half the number of workers because I got this machine. So I say to half the workers, you're fired. Go away. Have a nice day. Someplace else. Why do I do that? Because I can sell the same number of things I made before with half the workers. So I get the same revenue, but I don't have to pay half my wage bill because I fired half of my workers. That money that I used to have to use out of my revenue to pay that half of the workers, I keep. My profits are going up with what I save from firing those workers. Of course I'm going to fire them. Why should I hire them? There's no point. It would, you'll love this now, it would be irrational. It's very important. It is irrational for capitalism. But that's because capitalism is irrational. We know what the answer is. If you can do it with half the number of workers, then you cut the working day by half. Because that way everybody has a job. But it isn't 40 hours a week. It's 20. And with 20 hours a week, you can produce the same amount of stuff with a new machine that you could before. The benefit of the technology is in the leisure of the people. That's how you use the technology. And here it has an interesting quality. The workers whose workday is cut in half, that is the majority of people. Whereas the profit goes to a minority of people. What kind of an economic system provides the benefits of technology to the minority at the expense of the majority? That's an economic system of which one could use the technical term, that sucks. That's awful. But that's what we actually have. Because we think that a job and a worker are the same thing, and that the only way to protect a worker is to protect that particular job that they were doing, which has never been true, ever, ever, ever. But you have to think about the alternative, otherwise you think you have to do the irrational because in this crazy society, it makes sense. Example, China. And by the way, but when I give examples from China, I do it with a tongue-in-cheek. This is not an attempt on my part to suggest that China is heaven and all that. China has lots of problems, but they're different from the problems we have. And in that difference, lots of lessons can be learned. All right, China is already a larger market for electric vehicles, vehicles that are not run by fossil fuel, that are run by electricity, than either the United States or Europe. In other words, if you're interested in electric vehicles, the Chinese are already ahead of us. Last month, the Chinese banned 553 models of passenger cars because they burn too much fossil fuel. They're only going to allow companies, both Chinese and foreign, to produce fossil fuel cars if they burn at a low level and do not pollute the air. Why can they do that? Aren't they worried about the profits of these companies? And their answer is, we're not going to allow the air. By the way, China has had terrible air problems for years. Their industrialization has been very fast, and it has produced terrible pollution. I mean, some of the worst pollution in the world is in major Chinese cities. Again, they've had their problem, but they are reacting to these problems. And so they've made the decision, we're not going to allow that. And if there's a problem, if there are jobs that are lost in those places that can't make these gas guzzler cars, we will find other work for those folks to do. That's it. We will protect them, the worker, but not the job. We're not going to protect the job of a polluting car. We're not going to do it. They're thinking like the Swedish. So the Chinese and the Swedish are doing something, and it's important to remember that, of course, if the Chinese are doing it and the Swedish people are doing it, we should be very proud that we are not doing it. Some of you may have seen today the announcement of a new automobile plant being built in Montgomery, Alabama. It is a joint product, factory being built by Toyota and Mazda, two Japanese car companies. And it will provide, they say in their announcement today, 4,000 jobs for auto workers when it's done. It's going to take probably 2 or 3 years, maybe a bit longer, to do that. And so the governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, and several others were there. Mr. Trump made a few remarks from Washington, since, of course, this is good PR for him. There are jobs being created here in the United States, which he has promised to do. If you look at the overall statistics of job creation in the United States, it's very little. So he needs desperately to make a mountain out of these events. So let's take him, give him credit where it's due. He may have had something to do with it, it's hard to know. Toyota and Mazda didn't indicate anything that he had done, but there was an effort to bring them. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. So first, the state of Alabama offered an incentive package, that's their word, an incentive package of $370 million in tax abatements and investment rebates. I have no idea what the phrase investment rebate means, but my guess is it's the effort of a PR person in the governor's office not to have to say, we gave them a lot of money. But that's what it is. And that's not all, that's the state. In the release, and I'm looking here at ABC News's release, the figure the 370 million figure does not include a local incentive package. I guess that's Montgomery, Alabama, the city. And the state will also provide workforce training, whatever that exactly means. So I'm going to round up the 370 million and say there's another 30 million of local support and training. It's probably a conservative estimate. It may be well above that. but let's say roughly $400 million. Okay. The entire project of building and operating this thing is a $1.6 billion operation. So you just gave them a 25%, 1/4 of that, discount. It works out to $100,000 per worker. Now, it's really important for everyone to understand that if the state of Alabama, which is one of the poorer states in the United States, right down there in the, the bottom 10, it's richer than Mississippi, which is something that folks in Alabama tell themselves 2 or 3 times an hour. $400 million. Try to imagine what you could do to the schools in Alabama, to the roads in Alabama, to you name it in Alabama, if you had $400 million. How many people's lives you could transform? And not just now, but for the future, say through health care or education or the long-term things that make a society work. You didn't do that. You gave $400 million to 2 of the biggest, richest automobile companies on the face of this earth. Where is it decided? How is it decided that this is the best you can do with your $400 million? Well, it's good for a photo op. It makes the governor look like, oh, I'm bringing jobs to Alabama, especially if no one asks the question, gee, what might you have done with $400 million? How many people's jobs might you have created by having a proper daycare program in your state? It has none. By having a program for elderly, a problem in the whole United States about which relatively nothing is being done, and on and on and on, in terms of the service it provides, in terms of the jobs it creates. No conversation, ever. We are to look at this as if it were kind of an isolated event, as if our job is to say, gee, 4,000 jobs is better than 0 jobs, which it clearly is. But that oughtn't to be the way this is done. And imagine if what we did is we said we're going to create hundreds of worker co-ops in Alabama. And we're going to provide a fund, a $400 million fund, to allow the state of Alabama to say to groups of working people that are ready to produce something useful, are ready to go to work, just need the capital with which to get a business going. Maybe a business that used to be run by Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who built it up over 40 years and who are now 65 years of age and they want to retire, and their children are not interested in running this business. Their children are doing something else, and they face a very crisis situation. What are they going to do if they're going to retire? They could shut the place down. That deprives the 212 workers who have given their lives to this place of a job. It deprives the local community of all the revenue that a functioning factory or office or store provide. They don't want to destroy the community. They grew up there. And they don't want to screw all those people. They hired them. But what are they going to do? If they sell it to another company, who knows what that company is going to do? They don't want to shut it down. They don't want to sell it to another. What can they do? Oh, there is something they can do that would keep the jobs there and would keep the community going. They could sell it to their own workers who would run it as a co-op. All over the United States, people are doing that. Many more are trying to do it than can do it. And one of the things that's holding back people from doing this is the money. Guess what you might have been able to do with $400 million to say to the people of Alabama, and now multiply it by 50 states in this country, to all the people across the country, say, here's the money, let's see what you can do. And in case you thought I just invented this idea, I didn't. I want to tell you where I got it from, which I've done before, but I want to do it again. The British Labour Party, that's sort of the #2 political party in Britain, in England, which is currently winning all the polls. I mean, if things continue the way they are now, that will be the next government of Great Britain. And it's run by a guy named Jeremy Corbyn. He's the chief of that political party. And he's kind of an older white guy. Reminds you a little bit of Bernie Sanders, sort of the British version. And he shoots off his mouth a lot, sort of like Bernie Sanders. And here's one of his policies. They're going to, he says, if we win the next election, which, as I say, they're now currently slated to do, if we win the next election, we're going to pass 2 laws right away. Law number 1 is going to be called a law for the right of first refusal. What does that mean? It means that every business in England that wants to continue in the way it is, you're free to go. Do it. But any business, every business, any business that decides either it's going to close, or it's going to sell itself to some other business, or it's going to go public, issue shares and become a stockholder company, or leave Britain and relocate somewhere else, any company wants to do any of those things has to first, here we go, give its own workers the right of first refusal. Meaning, before it can do any of those other things, it has to offer their own workers the option of buying the enterprise and running it as a co-op. I told you there are 2 laws. That was the first one. What's the second one? Is to establish a huge national fund to lend those workers the money they need to do it. In other words, they're already doing this. They're doing what Alabama could have. But if you take the time and trouble, which I did, to look at the Alabama major newspapers over the last 4 weeks that this has been brewing, here's the news. Not one paper, not one journalist, and no politician of either party had the slightest idea to do what I just described to you. It's a wonderful example that if you don't want to know what's going on, you won't. You will become self-determinately and very effectively ignorant. You will celebrate what they're doing here because you have closed off any awareness of what the alternatives are among which you actually could choose. We could leapfrog over the British instead of them being ahead of us if we did, say in Alabama, what it is they're planning to do on a national level. Keep it in mind the next time you hear these sorts of stories. Well, you may not know it, but there are in the United States banks that have lent to worker co-ops already for decades. Those banks are out there. They've done real well. That's not a problem. They're there. They're willing to lend money to workers who are going to make a worker co-op. You know why? Because they learned that when workers together make a business, they care more about it than if they just go to work for somebody else. This is not rocket science. A lot of you already believe, right, that if you own your own home, you're going to take kind of better care of it than if you're renting somebody else's building. Well, if that's true, you care more, you're more careful, you're more nurturant, you're more observant. If it's yours, well, that might apply to your business too. So maybe a worker co-op can be efficient. There's a woman business professor at the Leeds School of Business in England. She's a French woman. Véronique Perrotin is her name. But she's world famous. Here's what she does as a professor at the Leeds School of Business. Leeds is a major British university. She compares the efficiency of co-ops, worker co-ops, and conventional capitalist businesses. And she publishes in all the usual business journals, which is why you've never heard of her. So one of my jobs is to introduce you to Véronique. Because what she finds is, systematically, the worker co-ops are more efficient, They last longer before they go out of business or sell off to somebody else. There's no problem in the efficiency calculus, which many banks know. So you can get a bank loan, number one. Number two, why not go to local institutions that are already kind of cooperative a little and ask them to help you? I'm talking about labor unions. I'm talking about churches. I'm talking about all kinds of organizations. Here's an institution that's already a co-op. Imagine what it could do. The institution is called a credit union. Many of you are members, or you know about them, where you work or where you live. They are, you know what they are? They are efforts of people not to go to a regular bank, but to make their banking a kind of collective community effort. You may not know it, but there are hundreds of billions of dollars in credit unions, which is a kind of co-op anyway. Why not begin a real campaign to get that money made available? But here's the one I like best. Imagine you hear in your community of a business that's about to close or to move to China, and that's going to mean the end of jobs for 200 people here, or 5,000 people. Some of you come from Brooklyn. You know there's several hospitals in Brooklyn that are on the edge of closing, and if they closed, tens of thousands of people are not going to have a hospital nearby, and thousands of people are going to lose their job working in these hospitals. So suppose, just suppose, you said, you know, this is a failure of the capitalist model of how to run a hospital. We're going to run it as a co-op. How about that? And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to set it up as a co-op, and then we're going to go to the local politicians, the borough president and the city council and the mayor and the governor, and we're going to all tell them the same story. Dear Mr. or Ms. Politician, here's a crisis. Tens of thousands of people are going to be without a hospital. Thousands of people are going to be without a job. We want you to help us convert this into a worker co-op so it stays there. We need to pay no taxes for 5 years. We need to get a subsidy. We need to get, we need. And if you give that to us, Mr. Mayor, we will run around this city and we'll say you're the greatest thing that ever happened. And if you don't, you won't get elected to door catcher ever again. You understand what I'm saying? No sweetie pie here. This is hardball. And you know where I got the idea from? Because that's for 300 years exactly how capitalism has worked. The businesses go to the politicians and say, like they did to Governor of Alabama, you want to look good in the newspaper? Here's how we'll do it. We'll open a factory for 4,000 people, and your picture will be on the front page of every newspaper in Alabama. You made it possible. All you got to do is give us $400 million. And she did. They all do. Capitalism was built in the United States on tax holidays and subsidies year in and year out for 300 years. All the worker co-ops are doing is saying, we want a little piece of that for us. And we will bury you if you don't. Which is exactly what the corporations do. One of the reasons that governor was there was she couldn't take the chance that Toyota and Mazda would announce in the newspapers, we were willing to go to Montgomery, but the governor, so we're going to Mississippi next door. Toyota and Mazda already have plants in Mississippi, in Texas, and several other states. That's how this game is played. But the only problem is, we're not playing. We could, we should, and eventually we will. But man, has it taken a long time before people begin to realize what's going on. In a cooperative workplace, in a worker co-op, how do you share the profits among new people versus the founders of it and maybe people with different skill levels. It's very interesting to me as I go around the country talking about worker co-ops as an alternative to a hierarchical capitalist enterprise. How well trained Americans are, even though they don't know it. How deeply in their brains are a set of skeptical questions about this worker co-op idea. It's as if almost you've been taught to be skeptical. So let's go through it. How do you share the profits in a worker co-op among all the people there? Well, the answer is that's for the co-op to decide. That's what a co-op means. You sit down with all the others, one person, one vote, and you decide what to do with the profits your work over the 6 months or the year has generated. Otherwise, it isn't a democratic co-op if it doesn't do that. And you know the difference in a capitalist enterprise. If you work in a capitalist enterprise, you do your job. You are paid a certain amount of money to do your job. You do the job, you get paid. At the end of the year, the company makes X profits. Your relationship to those profits is zero, nothing. You have no say over it, nothing. A board of directors, 15 people whom you do not know, who you've never met, whose names you couldn't write on a piece of paper, they decide. By the way, at the Christmas party in your business, the CEO will thank you for the year's hard work and will look at you and say, every one of you did a very important thing. You contributed to the profits of this business. Thank you. As to deciding what to do with them, go home. It's none of your business. Your job was to produce the profits. And that's when your job ends. We, a tiny group of people, you didn't elect them, you can't recall them, nothing. They decide what to do with the profits. They just thank you for helping to produce. What a system. What a system. So a corporation, it decides collectively what to do with the profits. Now, it could decide this business owes a lot to Louise over there. You know why? Because Louise figured out how to make this thing we do in this factory. And we want to honor and reward her because in a way our whole business is a result of her ingenuity. And we're going to give her X dollars, or X dollars every month, or a house to live in, or God knows what, whatever you think is appropriate. Could you give one individual that? Sure you could. Because that's what a co-op does. It decides what to do with its profits. The notion that a co-op wouldn't reward innovation, why not? If you want to stimulate innovation, you give it a reward. Now, you wouldn't give it the kind of reward we do in capitalism. This last week, the Amazon Corporation reached a milestone. It made Mr. Jeff Bezos, I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, but it's spelled like that, B-E-Z-O-S. It made him not only the richest man in the United States, but it made him the richest man who's ever lived in the United States. His wealth is now somewhere 110 or 112 billion dollars. The worker co-op, unlikely to do that. Not going to give one guy $110 billion while the average worker can't send his or her kid to college. Not going to do that. Because that would be grotesque. I guess I'm saying to you, it is grotesque. How in the world do you allow this? One man with more money than God. And even God is crying about. If you can make more money by forcing your workers to work faster on an assembly line, you will make more profit. However, You will also cause more injuries to those workers. They will have to visit the doctor more often. They will require surgeries or help in getting over the... Now, if you actually sit down and figure out the extra medical costs of what you've just done against the extra profits you earned, the rational decision would never be to do that, because the extra profits are less than the cost of the medical interventions of what you just did. But in our capitalist system, the capitalist doesn't have to do that. That's not his... So he doesn't count that. He counts the profit, because he gets that, but he doesn't count the costs, because he doesn't have to cover those. That's either the problem of the worker or the problem of a health insurer or something. He doesn't care. Not his problem. If you set things up like that, you're going to get lots of irrational decisions. The environment is that. For many, many years, corporations didn't have to count the environmental consequences. They dumped toxic material in the back of the factory, and it just seeped into the ground, and then we all got cancer because the water we drank 10 years later is polluted and gave it to our babies, and they got sick and all the rest of it. Doesn't matter. It's not a cost to the business. Not a cost. Well, the environment teaches that. If you don't pay attention, if you don't make this intervention, you have an endless series of irrational decisions. Let me take a moment, just a moment, to teach you in economics. Capitalism has always justified itself on the grounds that it's efficient. And how is it efficient? Because business knows it does what's most profitable. It chooses not to do the thing that isn't so profitable in order to focus instead on making something that is more profitable. The implicit idea is profit measures efficiency. Profit is the sign that you're being efficient. But of course it isn't if the way you calculate profit leaves out lots of costs. So it's efficient to build your factory right here. Why? Because the crap that comes out of the smokestack, which requires everybody in 10 miles to go to have their sheets cleaned more often than otherwise, to have emphysema more often than otherwise, to have the plants in their yard die because of the bad air more often. You don't count those, then your calculation about profit has nothing to do with efficiency. If you counted the costs, you would never build the plant there. You would insist that the plant be built somewhere else, further away from the areas it can damage. So capitalism, using profit as the calculus, is an inefficient system, and always has been. The environment is teaching that to people, which is why I like the movement. It's a nice, dramatic way of saying, wow, you people have been doing... Simple example, the automobile industry. That's crazy. An individual car, it's the biggest killer of people in accidents, the biggest injurer of people in accident, the biggest waster of fossil fuels, the biggest polluter of the air. I mean, this is unbelievably inefficient. If efficiency means how many people can you move quickly 6 miles, or any other way you measure it, the private automobile should be outlawed. It is an inefficient waste of resources. But we don't require the automobile company to cover any of these costs. It doesn't. Not only that, we subsidize the automobile business. You all know that. Or maybe you don't. You know what you need to have a car? In order for you to buy a car, you may never have thought of this. You need a road. Because the car on the grass, not so good. So you need a road. You need lots of roads. If the car company had to provide for you not just the car, but the road, they would lose a lot of money. They are only profitable because you pay for the road, you poor schmuck. Your taxes pay for the road, to build it, to maintain it, and if you're really unlucky, to pay a toll on top of it. in order that they can sell you a car at a profit to them. This is nuts. At some point, you will, and if you don't, your descendants will, live in the United States, and if you and I are still alive, we'll bounce our little grandkid on our knee and try to explain to that little boy or that little girl how we, who appear to be intelligent people, bought this, lived in this. Let people obviously trying to steal every nickel we have tell us how reasonable the system was, how successful it was. I mean, it's beyond words. This last week, Donald Trump and his Secretary of Energy decided to open the entire coastline of the United States, east and west, to unlimited drilling to produce what we know will be all kinds of gas and oil disasters and explosions and spills and wiping out animals and vegetation and fouling it. Why? In order to do what? To burn more of that fuel that pollutes the environment. Who? We permit the companies who profit off this stuff to pay for research published in scientific journals that muddies the water, so we're told that, yeah, for every article that tells you it's terrible, there's another article that's not so bad. We permit this. It's kind of the end.